You have to ask yourself, am I predominantly a doctor? Am I predominantly an entrepreneur? And am I a businessman? Am I a scientist? And how do I want to do this? What blend do I want to do?
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Business and Medicine podcast. This is your host, Adrian Kutstruk, and I'm excited to bring you a very special episode today, where we'll be hearing from two physicians and associate professors at the Schulich School of Medicine about their journeys to innovation and entrepreneurship, and how they were able to balance these ventures with their clinical practice and academic responsibilities. This interview was actually recorded as a panel discussion that the Business and Medicine Club at Western held, and we were able to use the recording as an episode for this podcast. We re-recorded some of the questions asked by students at the end of the presentation to maintain privacy, but want to thank everyone for coming to the talk and for asking such insightful questions. Without further ado, I'll begin with introducing our two speakers for today. Our first speaker, Dr. Michael Rieder, has a distinguished career that exemplifies clinical and research excellence. Dr. Rieder is a distinguished university professor in the Department of Pediatrics, Physiology and Pharmacology and Medicine at Western University, and a scientist at the Roberts Research Institute. He is a member of the Drug Therapy Committee of the CPS and has served as a consultant to Health Canada, the NIH, the MRC, and the Canadian College of Academies. Dr. Rieder's research focuses on drug and food safety and optimal therapeutics in children. His work is supported by Genome Canada, the CIHR, and NSERC. Dr. Rieder has published 4 books, 33 book chapters, and over 300 peer-reviewed manuscripts, and has trained more than 60 fellows and graduate students. Notably for today's discussion, his work has resulted in the creation of 2 new Canadian companies, Adept Diagnostics and Pharmasees. Assay kits made by Adept Diagnostics have been approved for regulatory use by Health Canada and the US FDA, and are used in food production and processing plants across North America. He holds numerous awards and recognitions, and is the only endowed chair in pediatric clinical pharmacology in Canada, and is the past president of the Canadian Society of Pharmacology and Therapeutics. Our second speaker is Dr. George J. Klein, and his background parallels the incredible clinical and research accomplishments of Dr. Rieder. Dr. Klein's research has focused on cardiac arrhythmias, with contributions to the natural history and management of the Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, the operative and ablative management of arrhythmias, and the understanding of clinical syncope. He is the inventor of the implantable loop recorder, Reveal RX. He is an associate editor of the Journal of Cardiac Electrophysiology, an associate editor of Pacing and Clinical Electrophysiology, and is on the editorial board of 3 scientific journals. He served on the test committee for cardiac electrophysiology of the American Board of Internal Medicine from 1996 to 2005, and was chair of the committee from 2000 to 2005. He was the 2003 recipient of the Distinguished Teacher Award of the North American Society for Pacing and Electrophysiology, now known as Heart Rhythm Society. He has supervised the arrhythmia training of over 148 research fellows over the years. He has published over 12 books, 100 book chapters, and 600 papers, and currently holds 12 U.S. patents. We are extremely fortunate and excited to have Drs. Rieder and Klein with us today.
Dr. Klein, Dr. Rieder, thank you both very much for joining us today. Could you begin by telling us how your journey to entrepreneurship started as a physician?
I've always considered myself a doctor first and business inventor second. So my concepts have come across from clinical needs. So the implantable loop recorder was a need for people who have sudden loss of consciousness or events that are very infrequent. And it happened maybe once every 3 months, 6 months, that type of period. And we needed something like a black box. So at least when they recover from their blackout, at least you have some idea of what's happening. So that's just an example of, I've been a doctor and a clinical researcher all of my career, and whatever meager ideas I've had that have been successful have come out of a clinical need. I think sometimes people have to decide how much of a doctor do they want to be and how much of an entrepreneur they want to be, because that's how your career is going to unfold. So I spent some time on the board of a cryocath company, which has now been bought out by Medtronic. But they came to me because of my research activities in cryosurgery, and I got involved with the company, and I got enmeshed with their product development and patents and so on. But I came on predominantly as the doctor on the board, not as the business person. I learned a lot about business, but I was the doctor. So you have to decide what you want to do. My patent for the implantable loop recorder, which is basically a tiny device, maybe 1/3 of a Bic pen, let's say, that gets implanted under your skin. It can record various parameters, namely ECG and vibration and so on. And it's meant to last for a long time. So I was confronted with many years ago when I was a young fellow of what am I going to do with this concept? How am I going to develop it? So one route is to go whole hog into the business of it and then develop the product, raise the money, do everything, get something going. And that was not within my field of expertise. I quickly also realized that this is very expensive. I went to get my first patent and I found out what a complicated and expensive process it is. To get a proper patent costs thousands of dollars. And then guess what? You got to do it for each jurisdiction in the whole world. You have to decide which ones are important, where you want to do your emphasis. This is not an easy thing, and it's very, very expensive. So rather than go $50,000 into the hole, I decided I was going to be a doctor and did non-disclosures, and I approached various industry people who thought that this was a good idea and they would develop it. And we cut a deal where they would take all the financial responsibilities. I would be the main doctor on the project, if you will, and take a monetary piece, if you will. And let's not be crass about it. That's the way it is. But it's not the same as being an exclusive entrepreneur, but it suited me because I could be virtually a full-time doctor and inventor. And the advantage of that is I immediately had access to 40 highly qualified technicians and scientists, and the biggest medical device company in the world was at my disposal. And the product went from a concept to clinical trial to now in its 5th generation product, and it's making a lot of money for them, so they're very happy with that. But I'm very happy because I have the satisfaction. So I guess my long-winded dissertation is just to show you that there are various ways that you can do this, and you have to ask yourself, am I predominantly a doctor? Am I predominantly an entrepreneur? And am I a businessman? Am I a scientist? And how do I want to do this? What blend do I want to do? I think most of you will probably be doctors first. So your major emphasis is, I've got a great idea. There's an unmet need of some type. What's the best way I can develop that? Huh?
He's raised an excellent segue into my approach, because I'm actually looking at it from a different point of view. Not that I'm an entrepreneur first, because I'm not, but I started my career in pharmacy, and I realized pretty quickly I didn't like retail work. And even though I wasn't a pharmacist, I still like drugs and pharmacology. So I wound up in clinical pharmacology and went from Detroit to U of T, where I did my fellowship and also a PhD. When I finished, I was quite interested in research. For most of my career, I've been a bench scientist. And at the end of your career, you got a bunch of publications that nobody ever reads, and that's fine. But along the way, I was interested in sort of seeing where stuff could go. And I have to be honest, part of my entrepreneurship arose from serendipity. So my oldest son and a local entrepreneur's youngest son were playing on the same hockey team. And so after a hockey game, we went out for dinner. He says, well, what do you actually do? I know you're a scientist, but what do you actually do? So I told him what I did in terms of the immunologic work I was doing in adverse drug reactions. He said, well, can you identify bacteria with that? And I said, yeah, why would you? And he was in food safety. So he said, well, we have this big need. So he pointed out to me an unmet need, which was the area of rapid point of care production of food tests. So I thought, well, that's interesting. We could do that. So that led us on a search. Much like George, then I decided, I want to become an entrepreneur and raise capital. And we actually found a small Canadian company and a Canadian entrepreneur who was willing to work with us, who partnered us with a larger American company. And along the way, we chugged along. We raised a lot of capital, mostly through grants, because I'm really good at writing grants. Managed to bring the product forward. And through collaborations, we actually brought this product to market, which is now being sold across North America. And actually this week, our commercial partners are talking to Hickman Farms, which I'm sure no one's ever heard of. But they crack 4 million eggs a day to give all his liquid egg products. So all the liquid egg products in restaurants in North America come from this place in Arizona. So the big entrepreneurship we've done to date has been around the area of food safety and development of food safety kits. And that really arose because of serendipity, curiosity, and a lot of hard work after that to find the right partners. Because as George said, Dr. Klein mentions, I wanted to keep being a scientist. So when I'm at these meetings, I'm not there as an entrepreneur. And we meet regularly. We meet every week to talk about new developments. But I'm there as a scientist and sometimes as a doctor, mostly as a scientist though. So that's how I got into the area of entrepreneurism. And it's been quite exciting and interesting and opening eyes to me, because you would think as a pharmacologist, I'd work with drug companies all the time. But I'm a pharmacologist that does drug safety work. So I study mechanisms of adverse drug reactions. No drug company wants to talk to me. So I got into it kind of from a slightly different angle.
That's a really great way to start, to see how entrepreneurship essentially became a part of both your careers. Kind of building off of that, I guess there's a lot of young medical students on the call here, first, second years. Did you two have any idea that you wanted to pursue entrepreneurship in medical school, or was this something that really came about just within your careers?
I had no concept of what I wanted. I still don't know what I want to do in life. I mean, it's when I grow up. So I had no clue. First of all, I never thought I'd get through medical school. I mean, this was a big miracle that I got through medical school. And no, it started off when I was a house officer. And quite honestly, my first one was also a clinical need, because I came back from Duke University and I was a resident here for a while, a fellow. We had to put in pacemakers because our surgeons did not want to put in pacemakers. Now, I don't know if Michael remembers that, but in the old days, it was left to the cardiology trainees to do this. So I couldn't find a vein if my life depended on it. I mean, you had to, at that time, you had to find a little vein and get it with a little hook and put a little tiny thing in the vein. And half the time you'd bust the vein and you'd have to start all over again. And on the other hand, I saw that the ICU guys were putting in these subclavian veins, so these subclavian lines, sticking a needle into the vein. And I thought, I'm going to adapt that and stick my pacemaker into a subclavian vein. So if it's a big vein, I shouldn't miss that, and get out of Dodge. So the other fellow and myself, we did this. We jerry-rigged the system, and we wrote the first paper on implantation of a permanent pacemaker via the subclavian vein by kludged together parts. At that time, sophisticated enough to know that could make me a lot of money. So we published in a couple of places. I thought in the Canadian Journal of Surgery, a fantastic journal, we published all this sort of stuff. And in doing so, we lost all our intellectual property. And then when the big guys grabbed it, it became a household word now. Everybody in the whole world uses these contraptions. And I could have gotten 50 cents on each one. And I blew that opportunity. And I had no intention of doing that, of ever getting into this type of thing. But after that, I said to myself, you know what, if I ever get another good idea in my life, I'm not going to let it go like this. So I have certain qualities. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I do get ideas. There's not necessarily the same thing, some good, some bad. So I had no forward intention of ever getting involved with anything. I just wanted to get the hell through medical school and residency. The rest was just serendipity and where life took me and getting ideas from clinical needs.
Right. Well, that's a good segue into it, because George and I were roughly in medical school at the same time, and I have to say at the time, the idea of a doctor doing anything in business was de rigueur. That was just like bad. Money, ministry, industrial money is bad. So research done with industrial money must be bad. The correlation, of course, means if you do research with no money must be good. Nobody ever discussed that. But so we actually didn't get that culture in medical school or that idea. But as I grew up, Winston Churchill once said, "If you're not a soldier when you're 19, you have no heart. If you're still a soldier when you're 29, you have no brain." So when I realized that, without industry, we wouldn't be doing anything. I mean, there's a talk I used to give in first year. The number 2 is the number of drugs that have been developed without any industrial impact. So out of 3,700 prescription drugs in Canada, exactly 2 were developed without industry being involved. So that got me thinking industry might be important. Like George, I remember when I first was doing our studies in the drug safety lab, we published these novel assays But they put them in the peer-reviewed literature, what makes it immediately public domain, so non-patentable. So that did teach me when I got the food safety stuff, I'm going to actually get this stuff patented and get some IP before I publish it. So I did learn from that as well. So I would say that, it's been a bit of a journey because I went to med school at a time when, I would say there was a pretty heavy anti-industry bias on campus. But I think we've now learned that, that maybe that wasn't the smartest thing in the world. One thing I did when working with industry was, when you work with industry, it's really important, you're both going towards a goal. And the goal might be common, but your deliverables are different. So you want a nice device, but they want it to make money and you want it to fill a need. Those are not incompatible goals, but it's important that you are aware of each other's goals. So one thing I did learn along the way was the importance of communication and also being completely open and transparent where you're going.
Well, the one thing that I might add to that a little bit is if you are working with industry, and I think there are people just like us, and we need industry, we need a partnership. We need to understand and manage conflict, not try to eliminate conflict of interest. That's not going to happen. We have to manage conflict of interest so that the university banning the drug rep from buying me a pizza is, I think, ill-founded. But nonetheless, we have to learn how to manage a conflict. But the one thing I did learn was that you can't be naive. If you have a good idea and you want somebody to help you develop it, you have to cover your ass. Let's face it. You give them an idea and it'll spread down the line. Before you know it, you've lost it. So you have to be very careful. If you have a serious discussion with an industry person, don't give them the beans without some disclosure or some patent in preparation or at least something to have in your pocket so that they're not tempted to just walk away with your idea. So I work with industry. I think that we can't survive without industry, but I'm not a Pollyanna. I know that I have to cover my ass and keep my head up, or else that's not going to work either, huh? If you both do that, then and have some mutual respect, and you both cover your asses, it's all good.
That's very sage advice. I couldn't agree more. Because we're in discussion right now with a Japanese company about an idea we have for some novel work with quantifying blood cells, and they've asked us a bunch of questions, and I go back and said, those are very interesting questions. And when we sign an NDA, I'll be happy to discuss them, because I'm not going to give away our technology without getting some assurance. I'm not just going to walk away and use it as their own.
Very, very good points. Very good advice.
And now a word from our sponsor. This podcast is sponsored by OMA Insurance, the exclusive provider for the OMSA and the CFMS. Well over half of the medical students in Ontario choose and trust OMA Insurance because they are a wholly owned subsidiary of the Ontario Medical Association. As a not-for-profit and using the group buying power of well over half of Ontario physicians, OMA Insurance provides a wide range of insurance and retirement savings solutions for medical students, residents, and physician members. They have non-commissioned staff who offer objective advice, education, and solutions. OMA Insurance can help you prepare for the unexpected and help get you back on your feet when you need it the most. For instance, did you know that if you take more than 6 weeks off of medical school, you have to restart the year again? And if you're off for 6 months straight, the bank can start to ask for repayment on your line of credit. I personally have disability coverage with OMA Insurance. I got it because school is stressful enough, and I believe it can help keep me and my finances safe during times of uncertainty. Plus, it's affordable and super easy to enroll. Make sure you're protected, because if the last 2 years has taught us anything, it's that life can be very uncertain. OMA Insurance is there to protect you every step of the way. Go to omainsurance.com to learn more about our special offer and exclusive savings for students.
I was wondering if we go back to talk a little bit about the process of how the companies and the device came about, maybe some of the barriers due to the educational backgrounds, and how you went around finding support for some of these barriers, and kind of how the process came to the final design and concept of the company and innovation.
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, in our case, it began with a discussion about a concept, and then we had to find partners in capital, because the development was going to take some money and it was going to require some capital. So the first people we found was a local entrepreneur, a guy who'd done very well in the automotive industry and automotive sector actually, and was actually interested in partnering for some entrepreneurship, which the people I was working with knew socially. But then it was a question of Our biggest problem, to be blunt, was capital. It wasn't a problem with ideas. And Canada's not a great place to find venture capital. You know, if Dr. Klein and I were in Boston, there'd be people knocking our doors over to talk to us, to give us venture capital, to give us money to develop things. Canada is not that way. We've got to work at it to find venture capital. So we have to hunt around. And it was a lot of sheer hard work. The problem with success is that it comes dressed in overalls and smells like work, because it is. So we had worked long and hard to find the right partnership. We looked around for a couple of companies, found the right one to partner with. And then we were able, fortunately, because we had some insights by then into how NSERC and other and the engineering community funds things, to actually get funding. So a lot of my funding has actually come from the National Science and Engineering Research Council, which is not a place that most physicians think of going to. But they fund engineering type research, and we had engineering type guys on our group. I would say it always takes longer than you thought. It always costs more than you thought. And one of the barriers initially we had was that we got a little too distracted, looking in different directions. So one of the ways we addressed to it, and I think George would agree with me on this, Dr. Klein would agree with me on this, is regular communication and being very clear about outcomes. So after we floundered around for a little while, we said, listen, this is where we're going. This is the project we're working on. This is the ones we're not working on. And we meet, and we still meet. I mean, we meet every week. The people that I work with have been meeting every week for the last 5 years. We carve out the time to do it and get there. Now, I have the advantage of belonging to pediatrics, which is an alternate funding plan. So my income is not dependent on the number of patients I see. So if I see 1,000 patients a month or 10 patients a month, my income is not materially changed by that. Now, a lot of physicians don't have that arrangement. In this case, does it cut your clinical time? And if it affects your income, that's a problem. So I can spend, a day a week doing this, knowing that the university benefits from it, because a lot of the work that I do actually is university has a contractual arrangement with these guys, and they get overhead from them. So they're not complaining too much about it. But it is, depending on your practice pattern, it can be a problem. So I'm fortunate that not every physician has that luxury. I'd be interested in Dr. Klein's views of this, because many people in the procedural world don't have that luxury.
Yeah, no, a lot of us get sucked into, I've just bought a house, I've done this, I need to make money, and you get sucked into clinical work more and more and more, and any research often goes down the toilet. In fact, most of us end up being clinicians. That's the way it is, because you have to, for a long time, essentially work at 2 full-time jobs. I think Dr. Rieder's looking at things from a level where he's got an established laboratory, he's got he's got a process. So now all he's not got to do now is get some money and to find some entrepreneur backers and so on and so forth, and move on at higher levels. All right, that's one way of looking at it. What if you're a lone doc with an idea? How are you going to get that developed, huh? That's a different kettle of fish. Probably that's more where I came from, because after many years I did have a team, but initially I did certainly not have a team. So I had to ask myself, once I decided I was going to take this idea to a tech company, well, what the hell are they going to listen to me for? I got nothing but a piece of paper and an idea and NDA. So how am I going to do that? Because these are very political places. You don't just go there and say, let me talk to the CEO. I'm Joe Smith. I want to talk to the CEO. That's not going to happen. So you need a plan to work your way up the chain, if you will, to get to finally talk to somebody who can make these calls and be the right people to talk to in a complicated company. I did that by befriending the local company rep, if you will, the fellow on the scene. And then, to be quite honest with you, I then deliberately schmoozed with his boss. And they were very happy to schmooze with me because I'm a customer, of course. I can order their products. So I leveraged that into moving up higher on the chain until I finally went to Minneapolis, the hub of medical tech research at the time, and probably still. And I managed to finally talk to somebody who can actually make things happen, who got really excited. The serendipity was, for the loop recorder concept, was that the fellow that I talked to, his mother actually had been passing out for years. And she cracked her head and no one could tell him what the problem was. So he just latched onto the idea. So serendipity. But if you don't have an established operation and you just have an idea, then you have to ask yourself, well, how am I going to make this happen? And there's multiple ways of doing it. You can leech on to if you don't have a lab like Dr. Rieder does, you can latch on to a lab that's already existing that might be able to help you with something. And that's a matter of relationships. You have to trust them, you have to respect them, and they have to trust you and respect you. The university also has seed funding of various types. Hard to get, a little political. I'm sure Dr. Rieder has worked out how to get it, but there is money available if you know the right ropes. But so you want to be able to come to this from being all by yourself with nothing and just an idea, or come at it from the point of view that I've already got an established lab, I've got credentials, I've got research credentials, I can come to the table with a team and a concept. I just need money now and some connections and get some partnerships going.
That's great. I think you both shine the light on how daunting of a task it could be once you have that initial idea. To bring it to the next stage, I think can be a very difficult task, I guess, for one person. One thing I'd want to ask here is, do you think that it would have been beneficial to take business courses or maybe pursue an MBA after an MD that would have helped you in this pursuit? Or do you think that just through the partnerships that you've created, that was all that you really needed?
Well, nothing can hurt you like that. I mean, if you get an MBA and you learn structure, how things work and how to go about things, and more importantly, in a really good MBA program, the contacts that you make there are probably more important than what you learn, I think. That cannot be wrong to get an MBA. I've always used people like that to try to move myself forward rather than be that person. I mean, I decided I'm never going to be a business person. I'm never going to be as good as they are doing what they're doing. My contribution is going to be to try to get the product as well as I can, and I'll help them, but I'll let them deal with that. If you're a young guy and you've got lots of time on your hand, I don't think you can go wrong getting an MBA, especially if you get into a program where you make very good contacts.
It's a really good question. I mean, I think there are a lot of physicians getting MBAs, but they're typically not getting it to become entrepreneurs. They're typically getting it because they want to become like a department chair or a dean or something. And that's considered a valuable degree for that, and maybe it is. The biggest advantage of the MBA is actually exactly as Dr. Klein outlined, contacts. So, why do people from the Wharton School and Harvard, Harvard MBA, why do they do so well? Partially because they went to the Wharton School and Harvard and because they got to know people and the connections they make. Having spent a little time at Harvard myself, I can certainly see how that would be the case, because you can meet connections and meet people there you'll never meet anywhere else. Most MBAs are not intended to drive entrepreneurship. They're intended to, help you run an organization. I suppose there's ones that do focus on that, but I think getting an MBA will never hurt you, especially if you want to do a career in academic leadership. But it may not give you the skills you need to be an entrepreneur, but it might give you the context.
That's great. Thank you both. With that was all the planned questions in the panel discussion. Before we turn it to the audience for any additional questions, I'd just like to give you both the opportunity to give any last tidbits of advice for medical students who are interested in innovation, and maybe is there a way to gain additional knowledge while in medical school for these topics?
I would just say, feel free to find someone that you can kick around your thoughts and ideas with and get a little perspective. It's hard to know exactly what your issues are going to be, but find somebody you can trust that you can sit down and talk to for a little bit.
Great advice. You got to find second fuel, the sacred fire, what burns in your heart. Find the person in the area who's willing to talk. And most medical school faculty, if nothing else, love to talk.
That's great. Thank you both.
As mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we have re-recorded some of the questions asked in the Q&A to keep our audience anonymous, but I would like to thank the audience again for providing some great questions. The first question is, when people pursue these entrepreneurial pursuits, do they often take a leave of absence from their practice, or is it more common to continue to work as they pursue it?
Yes, I would say yes.
Yeah. I would agree. I mean, actually, because a lot of the research I'm doing is grant funded, it could be argued as part of my job, because, as a scientist at the Robarts, where they encourage us to be entrepreneurs. So I would say it's part of my job. Taking a leave of absence is a big jump, because no one, unless you have a very generous venture capitalist, no one's going to pay you to take a leave of absence. I mean, the medical school might give you sabbatical pay, but that's, for most of us, a sabbatical pay at the med school is not very much money. So that's a big jump, and you have to be pretty brave to do it. I think most of us do it off the side of our desk.
There's no such thing as 9 to 5 in our business. That's just the name of the song.
The next question that was asked in the Q&A was, do you find that there's a bias against individuals who are interested in both academic medicine and business and entrepreneurship? Will individuals be seen as not altruistic enough if they pursue both pursuits?
My take on this is that communism is dead everywhere except Cuba and North American med school campuses. So yes, I would have to say, I think that there are a number of people who came up through the ranks, who are in leadership, who feel that the pursuit of medicine and entrepreneurship/business are incompatible. I think Dr. Klein quite correctly mentioned, people think, the way to manage conflict of interest is to avoid them completely. I will quote Dave Spence, and he once said that if you never have a conflict of interest, you never had a career. So I think the key to conflict of interest isn't avoiding them, because if you avoid them, then you don't do anything. The comment, first do no harm, is great, but you got to first try to do some good. So if you're trying to do good, you're going to have conflicts of interest. It's just how you manage them. And I'd be quite interested in Dr. Klein's thoughts.
No, I think you put it quite succinctly. I quite frankly wouldn't worry about stuff like that. I think you stick to your goals, get good at what you want to do, develop your focus, and then bring in the business. And then there'll be people who are jealous. There'll be people who are saintly. There are people who just don't get it, but I just wouldn't worry about that.
In terms of skill development, are there any skills that you've gained throughout your medical career that have helped with your entrepreneurship careers? And what skills should medical students acquire to be successful within entrepreneurship?
I think your best skill is to be a good bullshitter. I'm a Hungarian immigrant. I got off the boat. Couldn't speak English and so on and so forth with my parents. And I went to a great public school and a great high school. And they emphasized grammar and composition and verbal skills and talking in public. So your greatest asset is your ability to sell yourself to somebody. That's what I mean by bullshitter. In my view, a bullshitter is a positive attribute, provided it's backed up with some substance and you're not a flim-flam person. But a good communicator and a comfortable communicator, that's your best asset.
I could not agree more. I think whether that's telling bad news to a family or pitching an idea to a company, you got to be an effective communicator, and that's really, really, really can't overemphasize how important it is.
As a doctor, somehow we don't teach that very well. I mean, if you look at a lot of doctors out there, they're just pretty bad at it, huh? Mm-hmm. In all aspects of their career. I don't think we've probably spent enough time on it in medical schools, how to communicate clearly and effectively.
Yeah, wearing my separate hat, which is I'm often, because I'm a pharmacologist, I often get called about the CMPA for medical legal matters. And if you want to avoid medical legal matters, the most important thing you can do is just talk to your patients. Make sure they understand what you're saying. You can do, if patients appreciate that we're human, we make mistakes and bad things happen. But just talk to them, be honest about it, and in language you understand. Because the biggest problem I found for physicians is getting in trouble is lack of communication.
Or poor communication, quite frankly, poor communication.
You both have accomplished so much within your careers. Do you have any tips for how you balance your academic, clinical, and business interests?
I don't even think about balancing. If you have to think about balancing, I think you're in trouble. I think you just have to go with the flow of your expertise and go with the passion of your ideas and incorporate the business as you need it. It's not a matter of saying, I'm going to do 70% doctor and 30% business, or, that's not the way it is. You just have to go with the flow and keep your primary objectives in mind.
Yeah, I think it's a bunch of things. I think time management is important, but, I would also agree that, I think what your passion is, what you're good at. This work-life balance thing, by the way, is a fiction. The work-life balance thing was created by industry to try to soak more productivity out of workers. It wasn't intended to make workers better. So I think if you lead a life of medicine, you're going to lead an unbalanced life. That's just a fact. You have to manage it in terms of managing things. So make sure you have time for the family. Make sure you have time. You manage your time appropriately. One of the most important things you're going to learn as a physician, as an academic physician, is the ability to say no, because most academic physicians have a hard time saying no to anything. It took me a long, long time to learn to say no, but there are things that, really it's unimportant to you. It's not, someone's asking, I guess I'm not a big fan of meetings, I gotta be honest. So I think there's no better way to waste time than to form a committee or have a meeting. So I say no to meetings all the time because I realize that if I go or don't go, it doesn't actually matter. So that may not be the most collegial attitude towards the medical school I'm demonstrating, but I think you have to learn how to manage your time and reflect that it is your time. Anyway, just some thoughts. We have a lab meeting every week because it's important to my lab that I'm there. I talk to the students, talk to the techs, the postdocs, make sure we're on path because we got to keep them going because they got careers to develop. We have meetings with our industrial partners every week because we want to make sure we're communicating on the same page. But those are important things. But there's other things that are not so important.
The next question we had is where and when can students learn more about the business side of medicine?
Well, I think reading, I try to read a couple of newspapers every day, and I focus on those things that will advance my knowledge in those things that I'm interested in. And there are a lot of entrepreneur stories. They're good stories, there are books, there are chats, and there are all sorts of ways to find out from people's stories that might inspire you or might help you a little bit one way or another. So you don't necessarily need a formal program, but just stay interested, keep your ear to the ground, and devote some time to reading what's happening in the business. How many of you read the business section of a couple of newspapers? They read the Wall Street Journal and the Globe and Mail, for example. I mean, depending on your political leanings. But how many of you read that and read the finance section and see what's happening? The finance section usually often helps you with who's doing what. And so some of those guys who are in the finance columns are pretty smart dudes. They actually can get to the heart of things, which is why they're there. I'm a big fan of Eric regularly of the Globe. He's a very smart dude. So whenever Eric speaks, I listen.
That's great advice. If you're going to read something, one thing I like reading is The Economist. I subscribe to The Economist. It's short, it's worldwide coverage, and they have these short, punchy articles. They have a section on business and also world affairs. I would agree that's a good way to get in touch. I think talking to people who have been in the process, I think there is a gap for students interested in this area. I think, in terms of anyone who's interested in developing things, Dr. Shepard, our president of Western, is a big fan of entrepreneurs, especially student entrepreneurs. So there might be an opportunity to think about developing some resources for students in terms of, perhaps podcasts, talking to people around who've done it, some resources online. But I would agree that if you look at highly successful people, one thing to do is they read a lot. And I think that's really important to gain perspective.
I think Dr. Shepard should be your next guest at your next club meeting. I'm sure he'll be happy to do it.
What are your thoughts on the different difficulties in pursuing entrepreneurship as a generalist versus a specialist?
Well, you've hit a nail on the head there. Because part of the issue is it gets to credibility being good at what you do. Because even if you're a generalist, you got to have a focus on something to actually, move forward. So I guess the example I can think of is the Rourke baby record, which is Jim Rourke was a family doctor in Goderich, who got interested in developing actually a systematic way for approaching child health. He developed a system called the Rourke baby record, which is now used all across Canada. So he was a family doctor who went entrepreneurial, but he had a very specific focus. So to get good at entrepreneurship, I think you have to have a passion and a focus. Anyway, I'd be interested in Dr. Klein's views on this, but I think you can do it as a generalist, but it's harder because you got to focus.
No, and I can't agree with you more. I mean, you can be a generalist, but you have to have a passion in your sphere and an expertise in your sphere that you can sell to other people as a good idea. So you can be a generalist, but that doesn't mean that you're scattered all over the place. You can still have there are important issues to generalists that you can develop and sell. Some of the most successful EMR people are family doctors. There's lots of good stuff to be done in family medicine if you're imaginative and you got your head to the ground. There's lots of issues, probably more than in the subspecialty areas.
Yeah, well, like I said, Jim Rourke was a family doctor in Goderich, Ontario, who's created something that's used across North America.
This is a question specifically for Dr. Klein. If you were to go back to when you thought of the pacemaker idea, would you have gone to a lawyer before trying to publish it? How do you secure IP rights to an idea you have, and at what point should you do it?
Well, I can't. I mean, things change. It's been a long time since I went through the process, but you need to get something that you can explain to somebody. And if you really want to protect it, then you would go to a patent lawyer. You don't necessarily have to go through a full patent, but you can have something like a patent pending or something, or some at least a process to start the process. And then an NDA is a non-disclosure agreement. You have a lawyer or somebody who knows how to do an NDA, do one properly, so that whoever you identify to discuss your idea with is not going to walk away with it, right? So you need some protection, and the most reasonable protection is at least an initial patent issue, which might cost you a few bucks, but not as much as getting patents in 40 countries in the world, and a solid NDA. You definitely don't want to publish a paper on your giving away your idea, because then it's in the public domain and you're finished, right? So if you publish something, it should sort of maybe skirt around it, but don't give away anything in that paper that would be construed as a disclosure, like a public disclosure.
Dr. Klein and Dr. Rieder, it was an honor to have you both speak today. I think I speak for everyone to say that it really opened my eyes to some of the opportunities outside of just clinical work within medicine.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.